Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another session with Paul Barnes from IG Mobility. Hey, Paul,
Hey,
and
Olivia.
Olivia Barami from the RFP House. It's been a while since we've been together, but we are now back with another topic that we would like to share with all of you from a corporate perspective in mobility and also an RMC/supplier perspective. So the topic that we are addressing today is communication dynamics between RMCs and service suppliers and corporates. So, Paul, I'll throw it over to you with a little bit more of an introduction as to what we will be discussing today.
Thanks, Olivia. And so what we're looking at is some of the do's and don'ts from a corporate and supplier's perspective when running or responding to a tender. And to start off with one of the key things that very often happens is, why do late notifications and changes happen, and how does this affect the bidders? So I start off from a corporate perspective, the why of that. It's I've seen that late notifications and changes often occur due to internal compliance requirements, and that there's a chain of command within a company for any changes. So typically, senior managers must approve changes before they're communicated. And the approval can take actually longer than expected due to availability, such as illness or travel, other factors, etc. Therefore, I'd say it's really important to build in extra time and allow for flexibility to accommodate these potential delays. And firstly, in the do's, I'd say, be very clear and concise. Ensure that all communications are straightforward and to the point, because we're dealing across different languages and cultures here as well. Clearly outline your expectations, what your requirements are, and the deadlines to avoid any misunderstandings. And I'll give you an example on this. The company issuing the tender may, for instance, be an engineering, an energy, chemical, or infrastructure business. So they have very, very detailed requirements on important topics such as health and safety. As many of their contractors are working in potentially hazardous situations, but the global mobility service providers don't work in these environments. So they aren't used to these questions. So one thing I do is I suggest coordinating with your compliance colleagues to clarify which questions are essential and how to address any non-relevant ones within documents that need completing. Then clearly communicate and provide guidance on completing these documents. An example would be the use of NA for non-applicable questions where they're allowed to do this. And this prevents a lot of wasted time on both sides and delays with the back and forth. So that one's one of the good ones to do. Secondly, I'd encourage questions. It creates a very open environment where suppliers feel comfortable asking questions, and this helps clarify any uncertainties and fosters better responses, which is what you actually want as a corporate issuing the RFP. Thirdly, I'd say provide really timely feedback. I recommend double checking that your internal stakeholders are all available to respond to the supplier's questions during the tender process, because this can be a very, very frustrating time when there's delays with answers coming through and there's a pending deadline for submission. Also, to offer constructive feedback on the submissions for the suppliers that you don't select. And this not only helps suppliers improve, but very importantly, it builds a very positive relationship for future opportunities with yourself and the market out there. Olivia, what are your top do's here?
Yeah, I love what you said, Paul. And my gosh, if all mobility RFPs were ran that way, would be so fantastic. It would be so easy and clear to go through the process from start to finish from an RMC and supplier side. So thank you for those points. Yeah, I think the first thing that I would start with, it might seem something very elementary, but it's so important and needs to be said over and over again. You need to start from a place of understanding all of the RFP requirements before you start to sit down and craft your response. Having a solid understanding of all the requirements from the get-go, and what I mean by that is actually reading everything from the first page until the very last page of the RFP or the multiple documents that accompany an RFP. It's really important to understand all the requirements. And sometimes there may be some ambiguity in those RFPs, and that's okay. But if we use the Q&A period to our advantage to gather more information, to clarify some questions or something that is unclear, that will help the bidder prepare a response in accordance to the client needs. Now, I want to mention one thing on the Q&A period. The bidders, in this case, the RMC or service supplier, needs to be strategic with the questions that they're asking. And the reason why I say that is because you may not want to give too much away. Be aware of your audience. There may be other RMCs or service suppliers that are asking questions, and they're also reviewing the questions and the responses that are coming from the corporate contact or the procurement contact, whomever is running the RFP process. So be mindful of the questions that you ask and try to gather information that will be helpful to you as you compile this proposal response together. So just be mindful of that. The other thing I would talk about, Paul, is you talked about, the way in which sometimes late notifications happen, or perhaps the scope of an RFP may change. From an RMC and supplier side, what I would say here is to remain agile and flexible and divide and conquer. The RFP process is a collaborative process. It's the work of many, right? It's not just one individual running the show. It's multiple people involved in submitting a successful response. So if things change, sometimes late notifications happen. There might be a change in scope. So it's important to kind of bring everybody together that is involved in the proposal process from an RMC and supplier side, and divide and conquer. Determine what needs to change. Maybe it's pricing. Maybe you need to rework some of the responses. Maybe you need to summarize some responses. We sometimes see word limits, 200, please describe your company history and ownership and structure in 250 words. So they may change that throughout the course of the RFP. And on the RMC and supplier side, we again need to remain agile and flexible and meet those requirements in the time that we're given. So just be aware of that and try not to stress about, the deadline that is coming up or the things that need to change. Just divide and conquer and figure out things and accountabilities for each individual involved in the proposal process. And then the last thing I would mention in this, this realm of communication dynamics from an RMC and supplier side is the writing approach. What writing approach do we want to take? We need to be clear and direct in the proposal. We need to answer the question in a clear, concise, and compelling manner, and use simple words. Don't try to over-engineer a response. Don't try to sound smart. That actually may backfire, especially if you're dealing with an RFP that is procured, for example, out of APAC. They may use certain terminology that in North America we don't use, right? So we need to be very clear in our approach. We need to be direct and always default to using the client's or the prospect's terminology. So sometimes I'll see a corporate client may refer to their employees as associates. Let's use that terminology in our responses so that again we show alignment and understanding of the client's structure or workflow or the way in which the terminology that they use. So those are the three do's that I would advise RMCs and suppliers to be aware of. Now let's move on to the don'ts. What do you have to say about don'ts from a corporate side, Paul?
Yeah, that was really insightful. Thanks, Olivia. And just from the don't side there is, last minute changes, really do everything to avoid last minute changes. You just don't want those. So making significant changes to tender requirements or deadlines without sufficient notice or even with notice can cause a lot of confusion and frustration amongst the suppliers. So to prevent this, I recommend always have someone connected in the tender process, but who isn't really in the day-to-day of this. Just really proofread all the tender documents before issuing them to suppliers and just make sure everything hangs together, the terminology is correct all the way through, etc., and it's really understandable. But if this situation does occur where there are changes, allow plenty of time for suppliers to ask questions again about the changes you've made, and potentially look at extending the actual submission deadline. Particularly if it's to do with changes in pricing or very time-consuming aspects for the suppliers. Secondly, I just say, it's for all of us every day, but don't assume understanding. Never assume that all the bidders fully understand your terminology that you may be using or the abbreviations that you may use internally. Always provide very detailed explanations and be ready to clarify. An example is a very simple thing is you may think that the way you run your destination services and your home search is the way everybody does, but you may actually be a little bit unique on some of what you require. So just make sure you communicate all of this. Thirdly, very simply, I'd say, avoid overloading with information. Really in that proofreading as well, stick to what is necessary for your tender process. What are the most important goals that you're trying to achieve? Stick to those. Don't overwhelm bidders with excessive information or irrelevant details, because it will affect potentially the quality of the response that you receive and where the bidders, the suppliers are actually focusing their main energies. What do you recommend, Olivia, from the supplier side?
Yeah, great points, Paul. Again, if they would take all of this into consideration, my gosh, this would be such a simple process. A few things from a don'ts perspective for the ARM season suppliers. Avoid lack of clarity. Don't assume the evaluation team understands everything and anything that you put in your proposal. Certainly don't use acronyms or abbreviations without defining them first, or don't assume that the client or the evaluation team understand every single piece. So it's really important to, again, going back to the point around being clear and direct, be clear and direct, define acronyms and abbreviations, which may differ from different country to different country or different region to different region. So be aware of that. Put yourself in the client's shoes, put yourself in the evaluation team's shoes, and make it very easy for them to understand your proposal. It sounds like such a simple thing, but sometimes that is overlooked, or it's something that it becomes an afterthought. So it's really important to start from a place of clarity. Avoid over-engineering. There's no such thing as a perfect proposal. And I know a lot of times we try to do everything that we can to make it a really solid, perfect response, but no such thing exists, right? We can only focus on responding to the questions in a clear, concise, and compelling manner and moving on to the next thing. And that can be a trap for some people that are perhaps perfectionists or want to have results. That is important, but be thoughtful around what is the goal here. The goal is to submit a compliant response that answers all the questions, but don't get hung up on the little finite details. It will not make or break you. And then the last thing I would say is avoid information overkill. Sometimes ARM season suppliers tend to give more information than is being requested. And in some situations that can be a good thing. In other cases, it can be annoying or confusing for the corporates, right? Or to the evaluation team, especially if they didn't ask for the additional information. Going back to the whole notion of responding in a concise manner, again, focus on answering the question, providing the details, but don't have a 2-page response on your quality assurance process or your account management team. Keep your goal in mind of responding in a concise manner that answers the questions, and then move on to the next thing. So just be mindful of that. The other thing I would mention too is sometimes if you have procurement, right, Paul, you work with procurement sometimes. If they specify, please don't include additional marketing materials, then read those instructions and make sure that you are not including additional materials. Here in Canada, sometimes when I work on different RFPs, that can actually be a disqualifier. So if you provide more information that is needed, or you don't respect the page limits perhaps, or the word limit, or sometimes the font size, like there may be some specifics around how to prepare your response. If you don't follow those instructions to a T, that can actually cost you. So just focus on getting the response done, be very familiar with the requirements, and follow the instructions to a T. Those are going to be my do's. Or sorry, my don'ts. My don'ts.
No, I totally agree with you there, Olivia, and particularly, you know, I've seen it where people put a lot of additional information in, but unfortunately they've buried their what should have been their first answer in all of the information to leave it to the potential client to go and find the answer.
Yeah.
So, you know, you're right. Or if you're going to give additional information, you know, just put your clear answer first, asking the question, hey, if you're interested, here's some additional detail. I mean,
Right.
people like that approach, but they don't want to be digging through endless words. And you're right, it can actually be go majorly against you if you don't follow instructions or you just waste people's time.
Exactly. Yeah. So this was our second session with Paul Barnes from IG Mobility. Thank you so much, Paul, and myself, Olivia Barami, with the RFP House. This was great. We hope this was beneficial and helpful to our audience. We are coming back with a third and final episode. Stay tuned for that. And thanks again for your time. If anyone has any questions or comments, please reach out to either myself or Paul. We're active on LinkedIn, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, everybody.
See you all soon.